We're going to devote our energies to sports and gardening, all the cultural pursuits as far as they're concerned. In fact, we're going to put the goons to sleep. Meanwhile, we dig.
Greetings and welcome to the Anadromist. This is Burn Power coming to you from the Caucasus Mountains in Tbilisi, Georgia. Somewhere very remote, it seems, from where most people watching this are from. But are these things that remote? You never know. One of the things, as you know, if you're someone who spent any time watching this channel at all, is you know that I really love history. And the reason I really love history, I've always felt, is because my own history is absolutely opaque to me. And on my mother's side, the Knukowskis, which is a Polish name, but it's a little more complicated than that, I've always known that it only goes back to my grandparents and maybe a little bit beyond that. That's all I've known. And it was me, in fact, who figured out for the family that actually my grandmother, who died when my mother was 15, I found out that just doing a bit of research on the city she was born in and her last name, which was Taschuk, I said, that's not a Polish last name, and that's not Poland. That's Ukraine. Now, the truth is, that area of the world, which is Western Ukraine, has been pushed all over with its borders. And she evidently immigrated to this country, but then everything beyond that disappeared. So I've always felt a bit intimidated by the fact that, well, that's Ukraine. That's the 20th century. In fact, when she was born on her passport, it didn't say Ukraine. It didn't say Poland. It said the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which is pretty amazing. Well, the point is this, though. I think she came to America in 1913. I have to do a bit more research on that. But here's what I know, is that area of Ukraine, well, you had World War I was fought right there. Later, you had the Austro-Hungarian Empire ends, then it gets caught up in the Soviet Union at a certain point, or although it may have been still separate for a while. I'll have to look into that. But then, once it's in the Soviet Union, Ukraine starves with the Holodomor, and then you have all the purges, and you have death, and Soviets suppressing records, and then the Nazis come through and burn things to the ground, and it's a nightmare. And then the Soviet Union continues, and then you have liberation, and who knows. So where are those records? Do they still exist? Don't know. And on my maternal grandfather's side, it's not much better. He was born in a part of Poland, which is now Germany, which was near the Gdansk, or what was called in German the Danzig corridor, which was pretty much the starting point for World War II in September of 1939. So, who knows what those records look like? It's intimidating. I did just find out that his last name was, his father's first name, the Knukowski, was actually Jacob or Jakub, and his mother was, my father's mother was named Mary Crow, which is a German name. So does that mean I have German in me? Anyway, as you can see, there's some big borders there to get through if I want to learn anything else, which I might. But through most of my life, I have never really thought much about my father's ancestry for a very good reason. One thing I have never told you, and I'm going to tell you now, but I'm not going to actually tell you everything, is that my birth name is not Burn Power. It is, in fact, a more Scottish name. And I'll tell you some of the ancestry names here, because they don't matter, because they're so far back, or so it seems. But I've never really wanted to look into it, because there's a whole story with my mother and my father when I was young, and evidently he cheated on her while she was pregnant, which is not good news. She ended up ripping up every photo of him. I think I've seen one photo in my life, which one of my relatives have, and I've forgotten what it even looks like, except the guy was, he was young. It was a wedding photograph, and he had dark hair, and unfortunately that section of the family has kind of drifted off from me, and I don't even know anything about them anymore. So my mother made sure, she always hated talking about him. She made sure that whatever was going on was just, it was in the past. She did tell me a few things. She did say, evidently, someone on that side of the family did serious genealogical research. They were really into it. And they mentioned certain names like Kincaid or Henderson, or they even said I was connected to maybe the guy James Watt, who had something to do with the steam engine, and also from which every light bulb has a name Watt in it, or as I discovered here in Georgia, the Russian word and the Georgian word is vati, which is watt, because the W sound gets a little tricky. So, but I've never looked into it. A few years back, I was wondering whatever happened to my biological father, about I think 2009 or so, and it turned out that he had died in Spokane, Washington, earlier that year. Someone once asked me, do you ever want to look him up? And I was always like, nah, not particularly, and the guy never did much for me. I don't remember anything about him. My mother did tell me that he was a pretty creative guy, and used to do the mannequin displays at the Bon Marché department store in Seattle, Washington, and things like that. But all that is just distant. Don't know anything really about him. She went to try to get him to pay alimony about 1964, 65, about 10 years after I was born. Turned out he had another family in there somewhere, a couple of half-brother and sister of mine out there somewhere. And he had skipped out on them too and wasn't paying alimony. So, as you can imagine, I wasn't particularly interested in the guy, since he didn't leave me much. He didn't leave me much in terms of memories, or I can't remember him, really. I must have seen him as a child at some point, but that all has vanished. But as time has gone on, I have obviously become much more interested in history as time has gone on. And again, I think the reason is because I don't have any. I'm a solo child. I do have brothers and sisters on my mother's side. She had brothers and sisters, 9 to be exact. One died when I was pretty young, and I've watched all the rest die, including my mother, back in 2015. I am in contact with a couple cousins, Frank and Celia. They live in the Seattle area, which is where I was born and they were born. But apart from that, and they're not, we don't talk on the phone every week or anything like that. We're a bit distant. So, we're distant but friendly. Don't get me wrong. Nevertheless, jeepers. So, so where does this story start? 2 days ago was St. Patrick's Day, which is ironic because I have an Irish name, Byrne Power, although it's not really Irish because Byrne is a last name, B-Y-R-N-E is a last name in Ireland. It's not a first name. This is an American kind of trick to put first names on last names as first names. It's really something that comes more from the South, but it's caught on in other places. Now American names are just crazily unique, which if everyone has a unique name, is anybody unique? And if you really want to hide and have internet anonymity, just be Jane Thompson. Well, nowadays what's interesting is Mary, which used to be the most popular girl's name in the world, isn't even in the top 100 anymore of American girls' names. It is here as Mariam, that's for sure. Mariam here is, I think, the number one name. That and Nino, which is the Christian saint woman who helped convert Georgia to Christianity back in the 4th century, speaking of history. So, for some reason or another, I was doing a bit of YouTube searching, and I came across this thing. It just kind of popped out for no reason in particular. It was Kate Winslet, the actress who's won Academy Awards and all this, talking as someone was taking her, showing her records of the past, and she was getting really emotional about it. And I thought to myself, so I went back and I did the usual look at the couple of names on my mother's side in some of these websites. I didn't spend any money on them, not yet. But then I thought to myself, now wait a minute. Let me look and see who I'm actually related to on my father's side. And oh my. Me, who loves history and has this deep fascination, didn't realize that on my father's side, through the paternal grandfather, and I haven't even figured out how to get into my paternal grandmother yet, whom I met once as a child, and she had some sort of disease that left her acting like a child, that she had picked up through some means externally to her. But anyway, I don't know anything about that. But I just started following my paternal father's roots. And oh yeah, it's Scottish. When you hear, I thought, and evidently some of these Scottish people had gone through Northern Ireland, which I'd figured out. My thought, whenever I'd heard I was quarter Scottish, was the following. I also heard that it had something to do with the South. So I thought, yeah, they probably ended up in Appalachia. They were like poor white trash. I always thought that about myself, that I was kind of like poor white trash coming from the Appalachia. Didn't know anything about it, but nevertheless, that these were like the Scots-Irish from, 17, 1800s, whatever, coming to America to escape whatever and to come here. And lo and behold, and I also thought, yeah, and the lineage is probably pretty mixed. So even though I say I'm quarter Scottish, I'm pretty sure it's not like pretty pure Scottish. And was I wrong? Well, what happened was I started opening up the doors. And one thing led to another, and it turns out that I had relatives who fought in the Civil War, one who died on the Confederate side. Turns out that I had a relative who fought in the Revolutionary War, a captain. And I suppose, although it's probably a bit late for this now, if I ever got married and had a daughter, she could be a quote-unquote daughter of the American Revolution. Who knew? I always thought I was just Eastern European, didn't really worry much about the other side. And then, the more I researched, then I saw, oh, wait a minute. It goes back to 1640. In 1640, someone came from Ireland, and I'm still trying to figure out if I actually do have an Irish connection, because it's pretty weird. My name is Burn Power, and I didn't think there was any Irish blood in me. It's all like Polish, Ukrainian, Scottish, and I still haven't found the Norwegians, which I suspect is on my paternal grandmother's side, buried away somewhere in there. And how much Norwegian, who knows, and where does it go? Is it, we'll see. But just given the fact that my father was certainly not a Christian, my biological father, and certainly not in by confession, and certainly not by action, by what he was doing to these women that he married. So I just assumed, like I said, I assumed it was just some strange story. But these people in the past, turned out there's a whole place in, Monticello in Fairfield County, I believe it is, in South Carolina. I have like maybe 200 years worth of relatives in South Carolina, and then another 100 in Virginia, because these people came to 1642 Virginia. Do you get what I'm saying? Pretty late in the game. May not be exactly 1640, but you get the general idea. My mind is still reeling from these discoveries. And then it jumps the sea. And it keeps going back. This is the part that really started. It's just like, okay, someone came from Northern Ireland. And I said, yeah, they're probably Scottish, Northern Irish, just like I thought. But they didn't end up as these hillbillies out in the field, although in my heart, I kind of wanted to be related to the hillbillies. But it turns out I was related to people who were part of the ARP, which is something Reformed Presbyterian, Advanced Reformed or American Reformed, something. Anyway, the people, John Knox style Presbyterians, if you know anything about church history, you'll know what I just said to you. And that there had been ministers in my lineage, and that this whole one area in South Carolina is just like swimming with relatives, it seems. But more importantly, then it jumps back to Scotland after a couple of, I think one generation or so in Northern Ireland. It jumps back to Scotland, and suddenly I'm related to a baron. Baron Henderson in Dunfermline, across the waters, across the, I don't know if it's a bay, I guess, from Edinburgh. And there's a castle of my ancestors. And not only that, and this goes back to, get this, the furthest I was able to trace my lineage back was great, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. 16 times grandfather, which you add 2 more, 1 for grand, 1 for father. So it's like 19 places back from father. It's just like, this is incredible. I had no idea I could trace anything that far back. I thought I had a person without history. It turns out I'm lousy with history. Including, here's a couple of the things that I found that was just amazing. There's a knight in there, and that knight, when he was 13 years old, climbed aboard some ship, got on some ship, went down the coast, ended up in Zanzibar when he was in his late teens or something. And there's a whole story about him meeting this princess of Zanzibar, who evidently was like probably Islamic. And there's a photo that I'm going to show you here in a moment. The princess of Zanzibar, and there's the white woman who I'm guessing wasn't like completely white. This is just a painting that was made from the original, like 100 years later. And the original was a bit later than the episode in question, so it wasn't like reportage of any sort. But then that was her black maid, who also figures into the story. And he got her to become a Christian. I'm guessing she was probably a Muslim, given it was Zanzibar off the coast of Tanzania. And then they got on a boat and they managed to get as far as Egypt. I mean, there's a whole story here that just sounds like incredible material for a novel or something. Not that I'm going to write it, but just incredible stuff. And then eventually goes back, fights for I think this is the 6th Baron Henderson, fights on the royalist side of the English Civil War, is knighted by King Charles. And I'm not sure how I feel. I always kind of saw myself more aligning with the the Calvinists in that war, who were the progressives, by the way. History gets interesting. But the point is that nevertheless, there were all these Presbyterian ministers in my lineage as well. So, jeepers. Oh, and then the other thing is I found out that indeed I have one relative who owned a plantation with quite a few slaves in this area of South Carolina, which is really the like primordial slave state in many ways because of Charleston being there. And that here's the fascinating thing. Years later, in the middle of the 20th century, they were going around, there was a project to interview people who were slaves back before the Civil War. And they interviewed a woman and recorded her speech. And she was from his plantation. It's just crazy. They sounded strict, but not too cruel. There was only one instance where she talks about being whooped, as she says. How she was whooped, I don't know. That is, say, what was used. Was it just was it a whip, or was it branches, or who knows? But the point was, she kind of says she brought it on herself because she was so afraid of walking past a graveyard to do something. And she remained very superstitious about this graveyard. And she was pretty young, probably around 10 years old or so. But nevertheless, she talks pretty well about her treatment there. So that makes me feel better that at least, slavery is obviously an evil. But since it was everywhere in the South, so here's the picture I'm actually getting about my lineage, is they come from pretty upper crust people. Someone who's in the peerage of Scotland. Obviously, different relatives go. One of them ends up, I don't know why, going to Northern Ireland. And then again, I don't know why, leaves to come to America. But these aren't poor people. I doubt there was an indentured servant here, because that would have led the other direction towards the hills. So, but who knows? I don't know anything at this moment apart from what I'm telling you. And what happens is that they come, they get established. The family gets established, and then and there's a mingling of families. So there's different names that show up here. But they end up being fairly well off. So then the question is, what happened to my father? And more specifically, what happened to his father? Because he's the first person. All the people in the family lineage, on both sides of the family, have Scottish names. I'm sure they stayed in this one area of South Carolina, kept marrying different people who were of Scottish ancestry. So actually, my Scottish ancestry is quite strong. It really is a quarter Scottish ancestry. It isn't a quarter watered down. The only names I saw at all that suggested anything else were just one or two names along the line. One name that struck me as more English or Welsh. Actually, there was a bit of Welsh early on in there. But nevertheless, it was pretty purely Scottish, all the way through from the 1600s all the way through till, I don't know, the middle of the 20th century, when my grandfather, whose first name was Glazier, but that was a family name. Again, this is a very southern thing to put surnames as first names, ends up in going to Seattle, Washington, where he has his son. So, and his son is my father. So, I go from a person who loves history but has no historical roots at all, so it seems, to someone with historical roots, and I am pretty sure goes back to the ones we're certain of go back to 1430. There's an Isabel Graham Clark, Stuart Clark Batty. Don't ask me why there's so many names connected there, but that goes to 1430 to 1510. Where did I get these people from? But it does raise so many interesting questions. And it also, it's kind of like you can feel the drop off. It's like, whoa. And what's funny is after a while, I'm 3 grades in, and I'm in the middle of the early part of the 19th century, and I'm saying, this is going quickly. Part of it is, of course, I'm older. I'm 67. I have no children, so unfortunately. So what that means is that, I'm being older, I can get to the past quicker. If I was 25 right now, I would be maybe their father or grandfather. If I had a 25-year-old child or a 30-year-old child or whatever. So I'd be their father or grandfather, depending on another timeline that never occurred. But then I saw a hint that I was related to some other people, a John Clerk and a Catherine de Maxwell, who are from the 14th, who go back probably into I'm back in the 15th century now. I may be able to trace this back further. Why am I sharing this? Well, it's exciting for me, obviously, because it changes my perspective on life. March 17th, 2023 will be a day that really reorganizes my entire head. How did I end up being from a poor family when I came from such nobility, and people who up until quite recently, hereditarily speaking, were actually pretty well off. I don't know how the Civil War affected them. I don't know. So many questions. But to think that there are these people, I have people who fought in the American Civil War, the Revolutionary War, the English Civil War, someone who was, shanghaied and ended up in Zanzibar in the 17th century, early 17th century, someone who emigrated in 1640 to America. Whoa. It just changes my perspective. And also the fact that there was plantations with slaves. All this is history. And, I don't connect myself at all with it because I've never talked to any of these people about it. There's no direct lineage. And in fact, if anyone was looking for me, they'd have a hard time finding me. Because the only thing that says I have a name change is an affidavit that my mother made so that I could get a passport back in the day. And since that time, I am Burn Power. And I got name Burn Power from a Mr. Charles Power who wanted to adopt me, but never did because the guy was a stone alcoholic. In other words, my mother, unfortunately, didn't have the best of taste in getting remarried in the early 1960s. But I've been happy to be Burn Power, and did cost me a lot of nicknaming in high school, which I now look back on fondly, but at the time was a nightmare. But there it is. And I think that's really important, to have a sense of one's history. And it's actually prodded me to make me open up the other doors. And the other doors are that Polish-Ukrainian stuff, and then what's with this Norwegian thing, which the last name of my maternal grandmother, her maiden name was Miller, which of course is like saying Smith. Yeah, well, that's a name which probably could be from Norway because they had people who milled wheat there, and they also spoke a language which wasn't so different from English. They were all Germanic type languages. So, but then again, the name Miller could come from England or Scotland or Ireland or Germany or Holland or Switzerland or Austria. It could come from and it could come from Norway, which is what I'm kind of expecting. So, just thought I would share that with you and show you a couple of images along the way. Why? Am I bragging? No, I'm just amazed. I had no idea, and what's fascinating to me is I've spent so much time dealing with history, and have known so little of my own lineage. What brings me to here, and of course, it raises lots more questions. But that's the interesting part, isn't it? The questions. It's like, we need those questions. Human beings are strange. We have to feed on questions in order to be alive. And when we stop, we start dying. Well, here's hoping your own history is interesting as well. All histories are interesting, quite frankly. It doesn't matter where you are. And I'm sure the history on my mother's side of the fence will have some very interesting surprises as well. Things I can't even guess from here. So, from Tbilisi, Georgia, where somehow I ended up here, who knows? Maybe I'll find out I have ancestry in the Caucasus. I don't know. I was always interested in Scotland. I heard about it, and I've been there. I actually was on a train that went right past that castle and never noticed it. I probably saw it and said, oh, nice place. But who knows? I've been to Poland, and that was eye-opening. And I recommend opening up your world to understand yourself. And now back to work. I'm not going to keep talking about this. I'm not going to turn this into a genealogy channel or anything like that. But I will do another report, maybe in a year or so, about what I've discovered since then. Because I will keep working on this. This is fascinating. Once I got into this, I just kept going, wait a minute. I just keep going back and back and back. And I'm so grateful for whoever was keeping those records. I didn't discover myself related to the steam engineer, inventor, James Watt, the very famous one. Because there was a Watt in the family, but it seemed to bypass that, a person. But maybe it comes, you go past and then down through another line. I don't know. Maybe I'll find a connection. The last name's the same. So, from Georgia, where I can also recommend the following thing. Hey, do you like this channel? Then hit like. It helps other people find the channel. That's what the algorithms do. And you want to support the channel? There's a link below, and I could use it. And you want to make a comment? Tell me about your own history. What do you know? How little do you know? How much do you know? Obviously, I don't want a whole book, but tell me about your own discoveries into your own history and surprises. Go ahead and write that down there. So, Drobit Nakwamdis from Georgia. Not the American Georgia. Although I do have relatives there too.
A people without history is not redeemed from time. For history is a pattern of timeless moments.